in 1915, 1916, the government of Ontario built a hospital in Orpington to care for their soldiers who were casualties on the Western Front in France and Belgium. The hospital, after 1919, was demobilised, but remained a civilian hospital, and it still survives today. But the Canadian connection is maintained. For example, there's the Ontario wing, there's the Mackenzie ward. People are very proud of this Canadian connection. There's a display in the foyer of the modern hospital, and in a square nearby, there is a monument.
People with lesser injuries, I think, were sent to Orpington because they'd got an additional journey from Shorncliffe to here. That's why all the 30,000 troops were treated here, and only about 200 died, which is a really remarkable figure. But that was primarily, I believe, because they came here for other treatment.
Of the soldiers who were treated in the First World War, some 88 of them were Canadians who died, and they were buried in a greenfield site, and that corner has been known ever since as Canadian Corner. I mean, I suspect that many of the men who were buried there, their families never got to see them. But recently, a couple turned up at our church, and they were visiting grandfather's grave. Every year, on Remembrance Sunday, senior officer from the Canadian High Commission attends our Remembrance Day services and lays a wreath on behalf of Canada in Canadian Corner.
Yes, the coat of arms was in the reception area of Orpington Hospital because whilst it was a military hospital for the First World War, when the Canadians left, it became our town hospital. When the hospital was taken down, the Royal British Legion salvaged the coat of arms, but hadn't got anywhere to put it. It was in a terrible state, so my wife and I refurbished it, and eventually it was hung on the wall, and it looks good up there.
We got legal permission from our Diocese of Rochester to hang the coat of arms, beautifully restored, in our church alongside other old memorials. And recently we unveiled it using a flag of the province of Ontario. We had a 2-minute silence, and I preached about this whole Canadian story. And I began my sermon by saying, look, a lot of you know the story, but like all the best stories in the world, it deserves to be told again and again and again. John Pateman, the chief librarian of Thunder Bay, was born and bred in Orpington. He pointed out that one of the men buried in Canadian Corner came from what's now called Thunder Bay, Victor Lilia. Victor Lilia was a Finn who came to work in Canada before the First World War. During the First World War, Victor Lilia was conscripted, served with the Canadians in France. He came ill and was taken to Orpington Hospital, and he died in, I think, 1919, after the end of the First World War, and was buried alongside the other Canadians.
I found a sad story of a chap called George Broome, who was a bank clerk in Hamilton. He volunteered at the start of the war and then had second thoughts about what he'd done, as a lot did. And his mother was told that if she wrote a letter to this particular person from the, I suppose, clerical side of the armed forces, she might well be able to get him off fighting in the First World War. But he was wounded in France, shipped over here to the hospital, recovered. He went back again, was shot and a bullet lodged in his spine, and he was then paralysed and unfortunately died from his wounds. That was a poem written about George, and at the end it says, "And when those valleys bright in May once more in blossoms wave, the English violets then will bloom above dear George's grave." Well, there weren't any, but at the right time of year when we held it, we dug up some violets out of our garden and put them on his grave. So they were there at the right time. So many people pass by Canadian Corner, don't know what it's about. So I thought about time they knew. So I wrote the poem and put that by it. As you pass by, please spare a thought for the Canadian lads who came and fought in muddy fields and trenches deep, so the motherland could its freedom keep. So many never made it home, killed a heap, VIMEO Ridge, the Somme and other places far from where they lived, grew up and learned to care. Please look at some of these brave boys who endured the bullets, shells and noise of battle raging all around, with so many now buried in foreign ground. Let us give thanks that they all gave their lives, their future, so they could save their motherland from an enemy who threatened to take her liberty. And in Orpington, at All Saints Church, in a plot surrounded by a hedge of birch, we are proud to have the bodies of some of those who now lie in neat and tidy rows.